Another, I think, big controversy, I would say, in EMDR and what's called prolonged exposure through cognitive behavioral work is what are the actual elements that are helpful to process the trauma. So there's one camp out there of psychologists and clinicians thinking that the prolonged exposure, meaning talking about the painful event at length for a very long time, is actually the healing piece. And there's also, I understand, from an EMDR point of view, that there's specific elements to EMDR that are helpful in addition to the prolonged exposure. So maybe you could, Tim, tell us a little bit about your view on it and why you believe that EMDR does add that unique and valuable component to treatment.
So the exposure piece is, I believe, is really important because, well, every time we expose ourselves to something, it becomes a little bit less powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the exposure piece is very, very important. But I also believe that the bilateral stimulation itself is helpful. And so sort of the theory behind it is REM sleep, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we go to sleep and we're in REM sleep, we're dreaming and we're actually processing events. And so, like I said before, a lot of trauma is unprocessed.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of the theory is if we stimulate that almost REM state while pairing it with something that has not been processed or digested yet, that actually leads the brain to heal itself.
Gotcha.
So for example, if we're processing a painful life event during a REM cycle, well, we're probably going to have a nightmare and we're probably going to wake up. So it gets stopped.
I see.
And so in EMDR, what we're doing is we're processing the pain a little bit at a time in manageable chunks until we can get through all of it.
So that kind of brings me to a next question. So there's been studies to suggest that the EMDR techniques can actually elicit REM-like state in an individual?
Well, that's the theory behind it.
Okay.
So there isn't a study per se that says that the same exact thing happens in the brain as REM sleep, but
Gotcha.
but that's kind of one of the theories behind it.
Gotcha. That's what happens.
And another piece of it is, we're bringing ourselves back to a painful life event while also focusing on something, usually eye movements, in the present. So we sort of have one foot in the past and one foot in the present. And when we are immersing ourselves in both worlds at the same time, then the theory is we're more able to reconcile it. We're more able to come to grips with it. Oftentimes what I feel is, or what I find is, these painful life events, they get sort of like locked away somewhere. And they get locked away with these certain thoughts and feelings, and most of the times they're untrue. And so when we pull the event out from that locked place and we're able to process it and work on it both there and here, we kind of change that narrative. We change that story. No longer it's a story of me being powerless. It's a story of, well, the narrative changes.
Gotcha. So that I really like that idea because there's some psychologists out there talking about a sense of pendulation. So, and I think that's kind of what you're referring to, is that you're going back to the difficult memory at the same time pendulating or moving back into the present, and that process itself creates a sense of safety where you're able to process some of the difficult and painful emotions.
Yeah, and so that's EMDR in a nutshell. That's not everything about it, but
Sure.
A lot of folks are skeptical of it, and I was myself in the beginning. I said, "There's no way," but through trainings and in practice, the results have been really, really surprising, even to me myself. And so it's been something that a lot of patients have really found a lot of really good results with, and now a lot of people swear by it, and it's been really working out for me and a lot of my clients. So it's another piece that I always have, that I can always add in where appropriate.
And I think that's a lot of our viewers and just a lot of people in general are looking for things that work. I think we're in the 21st century moving away from just contemplation and thinking about things to now we're interested in, like, okay, but how does that work? okay, but what can I actually do? And I really like cognitive behavioral therapy and EMDR because it creates actionable steps that you can actually take away rather than just, food for thought, which is something that is harder to put into practice. Well, thanks so much, Tim, for sharing your thoughts on your work with kids and families as well as the EMDR. And for you, the viewer, thanks so much for joining, and we'll see you guys next time. Take care. Bye bye.
Simultaneously
interacting with images, sounds, sensations that activate both sides of the brain. Patients might fight their eye back and forth following a therapy finger or stare of burst lights on alternating sides of the screen. The idea is to anchor the brain current moments. Patients call this recall. The brain idea is anchored to the current moment as the patient recalls the past. Then the clinical diverse coping like breathing, exercise, meditation to help combat the patients can use if they become distressed or during between sessions. Once the strategies are typically established, after one or two sessions, the therapist instructs the patient to recall most difficult of traumatic. It could be imagining sounds, smells, thought. Most often, some patients have most vivid memories related to a trauma that takes place. Patients focus on the sensation and emotions and experiences. We think about the aspects to engage activities like moving their eyes, tapping their body, or hearing faint beeping sounds alternating between each ear. Each set of these bridal stimulations lasts typically 30 to 60 seconds. Periodically, the therapist will ask the patient what are they noticing, feeling, encouraging them to discuss the memory from the present day in perspective. If you say, "It's all my fault," the therapist might ask, "How old were you when you were thinking you could protect yourself as a child?" Said Vale Wright, the senior director of healthcare. It's not that you just sit there and think about their memory. You play out the thought you are struggling with. For example, mine is Father Wilson, who took advantage of me in some ways. Now we move on to Thursday Night Football. We 2-7-7 teams. The NFC has a couple of bottom teams that are not very good. They're under 500. Rams, Vikings, Seahawks, Saints are all fighting for the 7th spot. Tonight it will be 2-7-7 teams. Saints and Rams. Watch out for Aaron Donald, who has 6 sacks and not as good as he used to be, but is one of the best defensive tackles, defensive ends in the game. And you'll see another one of the best defensive tackles in the game. Top 20. Cam Jordan has slowed down. Let's still look at him as a very good player to watch out for. Also a player to watch out for, Paul Allison at the cornerback position. Rated number 1 by this link. Kickoff is at 7:15. This is Sam Vaughn for Sam Sports Report. Okay, let's talk about 2 quick things about mental health. Number 1, seasonal change in the weather, and it is really dark outside. And I believe we had a little rain coming in.
Yep.
How much do you think the darkness affects your mental health?
It used to affect it a lot more.
For somebody, so for other people's in general.
I mean, it can affect. I mean, it could have a tremendous effect because you don't feel motivated. Like if you, for example, today's an off day from the gym for me, but for a lot of people, they look outside and they don't want to go out they don't want to leave the house to go work out, or they don't want to leave the house to go even get something to eat for dinner. So